Hi all, I have a very exciting game to show you, again from the Bilbao tournament 2016. Wei Yi, the Chinese prodigy, he's playing white against Magnus Carlsen. Let's take it from our current world champion's perspective, Magnus's perspective. D4, Magnus plays in the hyper-modern fashion G6, E4, bishop G7. I've been playing this a lot recently myself in Bullet, actually, with the quick C5, but it's a bit dodgy to play it with a quick C5 because sometimes white just takes that pawn and holds on to it, or it's just not very good. So the more sane way of playing this is not to play C5 here, but actually to play D6. C5 is kind of sniper opening territory. D6 is much saner. And in fact, after bishop e3, you can actually get the other bishop now working to probe to attack white's center from afar. But b6 is not as good as a6 because a6 is dual purpose. b5 not only provides the pigeonhole, the hole for b7 to attack, but it also means b4. So in many ways, a6 is a nicer move. And apparently there's a nice new book on this, revised book by Tiger. There's a Tiger Hillipson book, probably got his name wrong, but there's a book on this opening anyway, which is very, very interesting perhaps to check out. So a very hyper-modern, aggressive approach from black. And quite often, when I check this on live book, players with white are often playing f3 to blunt this bishop and continuing with queen d2, castling queenside h4, and taking it from there, at least trying to blunt this bishop. But in this game, white plays f4. The upside is, yeah, it does more rapidly support e5, which could be dangerous for black. The downside, it's a little bit of a softer target for these fianchettoed bishops. So it's a fascinating game from a hyper-modern perspective here. Absolutely fascinating. I'm just going to check out actually, just to make 100% sure that the GM name that I mentioned before, it's actually a Swedish GM. Let me correct this. It's Tiger Hillarp Persson. So he's written a new revised edition. So I think if we want to pick up an opening system, a hypermodern, which doesn't lose a pawn immediately, this looks interesting. Knight f3 now is played. And you might think bishop b7 routinely, that has been played before, but knight d7, just keeping that in reserve, one more move. And you might think knight d7, what is that doing? It might mean that c5 could be played, so keeping some tension. We have e5, so quite committal, and of course takes away the f6 square from this knight, but the knight can route like this, h6 to f5, especially if the light square bishop is removed at some point. That would be a nice square perhaps. We have bishop b7, bishop d3, and now c5, trying to crumble white's center. Okay, and now we have bishop e4, trying to just take out this bishop, but it does weaken that f5 from white's perspective, which means this maneuver could be handy to black. Knight h6 to f5. That's taken. And now we do have knight h6 here, disregarding this pawn because white is behind in development. He hasn't castled yet. This position, if white tries to be greedy, it's not going to end well, this sort of position, because black has things like knight f5. That e file is dodgy. There's loose pieces. It's to be avoided, this position. Instead, in this position, we have d takes c5. This ends up now with white having that c-pawn, keeping that c-pawn alive, and it looks potentially quite dangerous, potentially. In fact, it's supported now, it's advanced and supported by the bishop. So a fascinating position. If Magnus routinely castles kingside, then castling queenside with rook d8 is dangerous, very dangerous. There's not enough protection against this advanced pawn. Black's not in a great position to do anything quickly about this. So in fact, king d7, the king comes to attend this dangerous pawn. bishop a5. And in fact, all of these moves may have been that there's apparently a game it's been played before. Actually, all of this has been seen before. It's not completely original stuff. Rook d8. Okay, and now knight d6 with the idea knight c4 or knight b7. So knight c4, b7, hitting that bishop to try and get rid of this dangerous pawn. F takes, we have rook d1. The knight has to move now. Knight c4, hitting the bishop. Bishop c3. We have rook takes c7. b3. So for the moment, at this moment, black is a pawn up, but is about to lose e5. Knight e3, bishop takes e5. So this looks like a chaotic position. What on earth is going on here? Well, black takes on d1. And white, in fact, doesn't play rook takes h8, because you might think, hang on, this position, just to get the material back, this is fine for black, this position here, this is fine for black. No, the idea is actually unveiled here. After knight takes d1, white is playing rook d6 check, king b7. Bishop takes g7, rook g8, and you might think, hold on a sec, what is going on here? This knight stranded on d1, or is it? Hasn't it got c3? But more fundamentally, isn't black just the exchange up? Yes, given that the knight has got c3, isn't black the exchange up? You're not imagining this. Black is the exchange up, but it's not for too long, because the knight does use that square. It's the only square the knight's got. Check. King c8. And the point is revealed here. The awkward position of the rooks and the king. Bishop e5. So attacking the rook. Now the rook can't easily move here, because if rook d7, then check is checkmate. That's pretty embarrassing. Or anywhere else, check would just win this rook. But an incredibly clever and naughty idea is played by Magnus in this position. Can you see what he does? If I give you 5 seconds to pause the video here, what would you play with black? Really ingenious move. Okay, rook d8. Now, if white takes this rook too quickly, it's a total disaster. After check, sorry, in this position, not check. There's a key point. After king takes c7, hitting the rook, so the rook is getting away from this pawn in this line. But here we have check and b4, sealing and mating that with rook b1. That's just, it's going to be winning for black, this position. So this is totally to be avoided, this position here, with that b4 and this kind of mating net just being woven. So white actually has to delay getting his exchange back. Yeah, very, very interesting game. White plays king b2 here. So black is still the exchange up for the moment. But with king b2, there's no rook b7, because the king's actually like going to take that knight. You know, rook takes b7, then we take the knight, and bishop and knight is going to be fine for white against the rook. So we have knight d5, in fact. giving back the exchange, because after bishop takes c7, not knight takes, because then bishop takes and bishop and knight against rook again, we have king takes c7, and now all of a sudden white is material ahead. Yeah, if you look at the material evaluation of this game, it's crazy. First Magnus was the exchange up, and now he's like a pawn down. But there is an upside here. After king b7, the rook is really awkwardly positioned now on a3. It's an absolutely crazy game, really. Now here knight e3 is played, and black is really quite active. And we have again this terrible danger that black is going to play check and knight c3 and b4 if white is not careful. For example, just say g3, check, knight c3, or b4, not b4 first because of rook a4, but knight c3, and yeah, there's dangers for white in this position. You might think b4 here. This is dangerous as well, because for example, check here, and we can easily end up in a dangerous mating net like that. So white is very keen not to have his king embarrassed with such a mating net. So let's go back. So after knight e3, has to be very, very careful about this. Knight coming to c3 again with this b4 support. White actually plays c4, and we have b takes c4, and possibly the best move in this position here might be b4 to be able to play rook c3. So hitting the knight as well. So knight takes, we've got rook c3, and this should be kind of drawish apparently. Technically this might be a little bit drawish, this position, but this wasn't played. Instead this knight e5 was played. So at this moment, yes, it's equal material, back to being equal material, but let's see, check, 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 and yeah, Magnus is getting to keep his c-pawn here. This c-pawn looks actually quite dangerous. It's only 2 steps away from queening. Now white may have thought he's getting a strong attacking position though, and it looks dangerous. King c5 with the idea of knight c6, rook a7, king c8, king b6 mating basically, if given the chance, because rook c7 would be unstoppable. Just to give just to kind of show that, let's say Magnus played a routine move. Knight c6, c2 check. Yeah, and now not king d6 is not even possible. King b6, and this is just a mating net. Embarrassingly, can you see that? If the if the pawn queens, rook c7 is checkmate. But Magnus is seeing this stuff quite quickly probably, and actually what he does in this position is another completely ingenious move. Black to play, if I give you 5 seconds starting from now, what does Magnus play in this position? Total genius move. Okay, he plays knight d6. The idea is, for example, king takes, then we have the check, and this pawn is actually going to be queening. Nothing's really going to stop this pawn queening with check as well. So we have now knight c6, but with the knight on d6, it can now play knight e4 check to get away from this mating net. So king b5, And now here, again, the idea of rook a7 checking king b6 is really dangerous. But the king escapes with king c7 now, this construction. So they're both trying to weave these like mating nets on each other during this game, quite incredibly. We have check. Now rook a4. Perhaps there's an improvement here. Instead of rook a4, to play knight b4 to keep this rook on the 7th, to be able to take here and come back via f1. So even though this looks really dangerous, this position might be actually nearly okay for black, although I believe when checking this earlier that black is slightly better still in this position. Okay, so but that wasn't played. Yeah, we have the rook coming to a4. We have f5, king b6, rook takes g2, so unblocking the pawn. Check. Okay, now a4. Perhaps best is simply to play rook b2 immediately in this position, but we have rook a2 instead, curiously. a5, and now rook b2. Maybe the idea is to commit white to this position, whereas king can't step back. But yeah, this is still good for black at the moment. So king c7 is played, knight c5, stopping this pawn in its tracks there. Rook c4, and now knight a6 check, king b6. And there's another ingenious point to all this from Magnus Carlsen. He's not only trying to accelerate his own pawn, he's trying to stop white's pawns in their tracks. And one way of doing that is, well, it's an ingenious move here. There's not too many knight moves to be fair, so guess what black plays in this position, if I give you 5 seconds. Okay, rook takes b3 check, sacrificing a knight, but if you look at this now, the king's blocking its own pawn, and also these pieces can be double attacked, king d5. You might think there's a resourceful defense here in rook b4, but Magnus has this covered. Can you see what he plays here? c2. Yep, he's going to be queening. We have check. This doesn't change anything really fundamentally onto king c5. Black is queening. Rook takes, queening. Now rook and knight and pawn here you might think might have a chance, but do they really? The king's kind of well placed as well. Rook b6 does threaten rook c6 check. Queen c4 check, queen e4 check. So the knight is attacked as well, so it comes to c6. Queen d5, just keeping all the pressure, that pin, and also now queen d7 check is on the cards. So if the pawn dares move, then white is just overloaded. He'll be losing that rook next. That'd be hopeless. So we have king c7 check, queen d7 check, and now just f4. Yeah, this is a running pass pawn, and white really can't make any progress with his a pawn. So this is just hopeless. Wei Yi resigns here. A fascinating and very complex game. If we were going to try and provide a nutshell story for this game, well, it was proven that the early dangerous looking c pawn could be taken. The material fluctuations though were incredible. So at one point Magnus was the exchange up, Then a bit later, he's like a pawn down. But then, after material equality, he's got a dangerous c pawn. But white's like threatening to weave this mating net. Then Magnus is like a knight down, but queening his pawn. It's a remarkable story if you look at the material evaluation shifts during the game. Incredible. And it's funny that in a way, maybe if you think about it, that white's c pawn was the hope of the opening, but it was black's c pawn which became the destiny of the game later to queen. Yeah, this is what makes chess so absolutely fascinating and interesting. Games like this, it's just so complicated. What happened? What on earth really happened here? Very, very dynamic play from both sides. So I hope you enjoyed this one. Comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.